But I noticed in your written testimony, you talk about at least four different problems that we have trying to get generics to market after the patents have expired. A lot of people think patents are to blame for this, the high drug prices, but the patents are the incentive that cause people to develop new drugs and new medical devices. So could you talk about the morass that companies encounter or some of the problems that we run into when they try to develop the generics after the patents have expired, which, by the way, our founding fathers never wanted a patent to go on forever. The charge to us in that phrase in the Constitution is for a limited period of time to promote development, not forever and not for 1 minute, but for a period of time that's optimal. So can you talk about how they get bogged down after the patents expire?
Well, since we have 3 minutes and 45 seconds, I'll
that's very generous.
Describe this very complex problem. And again, I would encourage everyone to look at the written testimony, which explores this question in a lot of detail. One example that I will give that I think that should be of urgent attention, not just to this committee, but to Congress as a whole, is the problem of so-called biosimilars. So there is a new wave of drugs that have been developed through recombinant DNA and molecular biology technology that are not simple pills or simple molecules. They're protein therapeutics, often monoclonal antibodies or other drugs that have very complex molecular structures. And because they have complex molecular structures, the FDA and Congress have decided to regulate those drugs in a different way than traditional drugs. They're regulated through the Public Health Service Act and through the Biologics Competition, Price, and Innovation Act of 2009. The bottom line is that this different set of regulations has meant that when those biologic drugs go off patent, the earliest biotech drugs now are starting to go off patent because they were developed 20, even 30 years ago, we're not seeing the same flood of generic competition that comes in and lowers the prices down to commodity prices the way we saw, for example, when Lipitor, a best-selling cholesterol-lowering drug, went off patent a few years ago. We're not seeing that with biosimilars. In fact, in Europe, there are about 50 biosimilars that have been approved by the European equivalent of the FDA, but only about 9 or 10 by the FDA. And again, part of that is because the way Congress has authorized the FDA to regulate these drugs is very different. The FDA also historically has been slow in getting its act together in the way it regulates biosimilars. But the end result is it's extremely expensive and extremely risky for competitors to develop these so-called biosimilar drugs. And when they even get approval from the FDA, as I noted in my opening testimony, sometimes they're withdrawn because the price they have to charge to justify their costs is too high. So this is a huge problem because as a share of overall drug spending, biologic spending is rising. It's basically doubled in the last 8 years, and it's going to continue to rise as these biotech drugs become a bigger portion of the pie. And so addressing that problem is of urgent importance.
Can you talk about another one of the ways that these products don't come to market after the patent is expired? I noticed in your testimony you mentioned off-patent drugs with specialized delivery devices.
Yes.
The EpiPen has about 25 cents of epinephrine in it if you were a veterinarian and bought epinephrine. Yep. So why is it $600? The EpiPen, the patent expired on it.
Yeah.
And I think people have a misunderstanding that somehow that original EpiPen patent got extended. That's not the case. There's a new patent, and then the regulatory morass. But can you talk about some of the other drugs or delivery devices?
Yeah, so as one of my colleagues noted, epinephrine was discovered over 100 years ago. And the key issue here is that the delivery device that Mylan developed has patents around it. And the FDA has required that any potential generic competitor exactly replicate Mylan's device. Well, if you exactly replicate Mylan's device, you're violating Mylan's patents around its device. When in fact what the FDA should do is say, any other device which has the same clinical effect in a patient with the same dosage and the same treatment of the disease, that should be allowed. And the FDA under Scott Gottlieb, I will say, has begun to do that. But again, Congress could help the FDA by creating a statutory pathway for complex generics to be approved more rapidly.
Thank you for shedding light on that. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.